One man held 90% of all the oil in America. People called him a robber baron, a man who drained the lifeblood of the nation. His power grew so vast that the American government finally stepped in and broke his empire apart by force. And then something astonishing happened. When the company was shattered into pieces, he became even richer than before. That is how he became the first billionaire in human history. What came next is even more surprising. The most hated man in the world transformed into the greatest philanthropist history had ever seen. His name was John Davison Rockefeller, the founder of Standard Oil. His story forces one fundamental question upon us. Is a giant monopoly evil, or is it simply efficient? And when, and how far, should the state step into a market? Enormous power in the hands of a single man. Was it a blessing or a disaster? Let us step inside the rise and fall of the man who ruled the world with oil. Let me introduce our main character. John Rockefeller was born in 1839 into a family of modest means. His father was a traveling salesman who peddled fake medicine, but the young Rockefeller was the exact opposite, relentlessly diligent and sharp with numbers. He was known for two things: a devout religious faith and an obsession with numbers. In his first job, he worked as a bookkeeper, recording every entry in the ledger, and he never wasted a single cent. That cold, quiet temperament would later become a terrifying weapon in business. Then, in the 1860s, oil began gushing out of the American ground. Back then, oil was not fuel for cars. Kerosene, refined from crude oil, was burned in lamps to light up the night. The oil rush that began in Pennsylvania pulled in crowds of people chasing a sudden fortune. But most of them were ruined by wildly swinging oil prices. In an age before electricity, kerosene was a revolution that pushed back the darkness. And in that very kerosene, Rockefeller saw an enormous future. In 1870, he founded a company in Cleveland called Standard Oil. That small refinery was the beginning of an empire that would one day shake the world. The way Rockefeller grew his business was, quite simply, merciless. His first weapon was a secret backroom deal with the railroads. He promised the railroads enormous, steady volumes of oil, and in return they secretly gave him a huge discount on shipping. A secret kickback like that has a name, a rebate. He even signed deals that paid him a hidden fee on every barrel his competitors shipped. When you move oil far cheaper than everyone else, it is not really a competition at all. His second weapon was economies of scale. Economies of scale simply means this: the more you produce, the cheaper each unit becomes. Rockefeller drove his costs down with enormous refineries, and then suffocated his rivals on price. Then he bought up those broken competitors, one by one, for pennies. In 1872 alone, in just a few months, he swallowed 22 of the 26 rival refineries in Cleveland. People called it the Cleveland Massacre. Surrender and sell the company, or fight and be destroyed. In front of Rockefeller, his competitors had only those two choices. Having grown this large, in 1882 Rockefeller made an invention that would go down in history. It was a brand new kind of organization called the trust. A trust is a structure where dozens of companies look separate on the outside, but in reality, a single master controls them all. More than 40 oil companies were gathered under one roof called Standard Oil. In public, they pretended to be strangers, but in truth, they moved as one, on the command of a single man. The result was overwhelming. From pulling oil out of the ground, to refining it, shipping it, and selling it. 90% of the entire American oil industry now sat in one man's hands. This is what we call a monopoly. A monopoly means one company ruling an entire market alone. Once the competitors are gone, both the price and the supply bend to his will. Rockefeller had become the most powerful businessman on earth, but that staggering power also began to provoke a fierce backlash. Power that grows too large always becomes a target. In the early 20th century, the public rage against Rockefeller exploded. Cartoonists of the day drew Standard Oil as a giant octopus, a monster stretching out countless tentacles, wrapping them around Congress, around industry, and around the lives of ordinary people. Rumors that he bought politicians and bent public opinion were all captured in that octopus drawing. In that era, the corrupt titans of capital were called robber barons, and a new kind of journalist rose to dig up their filthy backroom deals. They were called Muckrakers. The most famous of them all was a woman named Tarbell. She also had a deeply personal reason. Her own father had been driven into bankruptcy by Rockefeller's methods. For years, Tarbell investigated every dirty trick Standard Oil had ever used. And in 1904, she published her findings as a book. That exposure set the entire country on fire. Overnight, the respected businessman became public enemy number one. furious public opinion finally moved the state. America already had a weapon on the books, the Sherman Antitrust Act, passed in 1890. This law made it illegal to monopolize a market, but Rockefeller's power was so great that for years nobody dared to use it. Then, as the public fury boiled over, in 1906 the Department of Justice finally dragged Standard Oil into court. The government's petition ran to 12,000 pages. 40 years of dirty dealing were packed inside it. Standard Oil threw its finest lawyers at the case, but it could not outweigh the evidence and the anger of the public. And on the 15th of May, 1911, the historic ruling came down. The Supreme Court declared Standard Oil an unreasonable monopoly. It ordered the giant empire to be broken up by force into 34 independent companies. The pieces that split off would later grow into oil giants like Exxon, Mobil, and Chevron. It was the moment the most powerful monopoly on earth was dismantled by the hand of the state. So, having lost his empire, did Rockefeller fall? The result was the exact opposite. Rockefeller still held roughly a quarter of the shares in every one of those 34 companies. And once they were split apart, the share price of each company actually doubled. His fortune snowballed. Worth about $300 million just before the breakup, he was past $900 million within 2 years. And that is how he became the first billionaire in human history. The state had tried to punish him and ended up making him far richer instead. Here we run into two opposing views. On one side, he is condemned as a greedy monopolist who destroyed the market. But on the other side, there is a genuinely interesting counterargument. During the years Standard Oil dominated, the price of kerosene actually collapsed. Kerosene fell from about 26 cents a gallon to around 6 cents. By driving costs down at enormous scale, the argument goes, he handed real gains to consumers too. Of course, the shadows over him were dark. In a mine he owned, striking workers were killed in the tragedy known as the Ludlow Massacre. In his final years, Rockefeller transformed into someone else entirely. He became the greatest philanthropist in history. He began giving away a huge share of the fortune he had spent a lifetime building. He founded the University of Chicago and created the Rockefeller Foundation, pouring staggering sums into medical research and education. The institutes he built would later play a huge part in conquering disease after disease. Over his lifetime, he gave away more than $500 million. His foundation led campaigns against diseases like malaria and hookworm. His habit of handing out coins to children he met on the street survives as a famous anecdote. The most hated robber baron in the world had his memory rewritten into the most respected philanthropist. So how should we see him? A ruthless monopolist or a great manager far ahead of his time? Perhaps he was simply a man who carried both faces at once. And the real legacy he left behind is not a fortune, but a question. How much power should a society allow a single giant corporation to hold? The fight over big technology companies today sits on the same line as that 100-year-old question. If you want to dig into stories like this from around the world with us every week, subscribe and come along.